Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, almost. I'm very pleased to be here again. And I've seen a list of participants. I see that there are people a bit from everywhere. I will give you some overview of what we are doing as ENIL and also what is in place in the EU. I made some updates on the presentation you have the folder, but I won't really follow it. It's more for your reference. If you want to find some details to go back, but I will skip some slides and I won't read everything. It just to give you, also to say, I would like to tell you a bit just about ENIL. And when I talk about funds, if it's too basic, I'm sorry, if you're too familiar. If it's unclear, please interrupt me anytime. And I'll try to answer. So ENIL is a grassroots organization. It's a network, and it was established in 1999. We have members all over Europe. These are DPOs, individual members, and we very much really work with people on the ground, disabled people, organizations for human rights. So we have like a big, robust network, and we try really on daily basis to deal with challenges people are facing in different member states, but also outside of the EU. So our main activities are personal assistance, data collection, peer support, training, sportsing, promoting deinstitutionalization, independent living, EU funds advocacy. We work on disability hate crime, and we also celebrate 5th of May. It was just this Sunday. We had many activities, European Independent Living Day. We organize every 2 years Freedom Drive. Check our website, and I have a little leaflet on ENIL. Freedom Drive is it's a beginning of October this year when we gather members from everywhere, and also people who are willing to know more about ENIL. We organize a march during that week in Brussels. We organize conferences. We want to also help our members to build their capacities, to brief them on what's going on in Brussels, etc. We also have a ENIL youth network, and ENIL was working on EU funds for already some time. And why? We noticed in the past that EU funds, who have really huge potential to improve lives of disabled people, it happened in the programming period of EU funds 2007-2013 that funds, instead of promoting inclusion, were used to build new institutions. And so in 2016, we launched a campaign really targeting EU funds. So the campaign is really, we are encouraging member states and the Commission to invest, to use properly the EU funds in line with the UNCRPD, in line with the protection of human rights. And we encourage Commission and member states to monitor better how funds are used. So this is a bit about ENIL, and I do coordinate this campaign, EU Funds for Our Rights. You can also find a bit more on our website. So our work is very much based on protection, promotion of human rights, human approach. So when we take CRPD, and especially Article 19, it's a very much basis, for independent living, and we look through the CRPD when working with our members, when checking how funds are used around the EU, and for example, just to mention a couple of things, when we talk also about non-discrimination. In general comments number 5 on Article 19, it's clearly stated that equality and discrimination are fundamental principles on the international human rights law, and also it's mentioned that segregation, isolation count as discrimination. So also it's also mentioned that various deinstitutionalization programs have shown that closing down the institutions, it's not the final, it's not enough. So no matter the size, that is not enough. The whole, the setup of services in communities needed to ensure independent living. And also some other elements are mentioned in a general comment in Article 19, like, you know, to use any available funding. Also, the states are, state parties are obliged to use public or private funds, not to spend them on maintaining, renovating, establishing, building, on creating any form of institution. There is also, for example, general comments number 6, Article 5 of CRPD, equality and non-discrimination, where states are really obliged to eliminate discrimination against individuals or groups of people with disabilities. And institutionalization is discriminatory. It segregates people. It takes them out of the community. And having said that, so having this basis in the CRPD, I would just have a short overview of EU financial instruments. When we talk about EU financial instruments, it's, we work a lot with our members in different countries, and we rely a lot on information we can get in countries. So I imagine we could get more info, you know, we depend a lot on what we find out, where we go also on the ground. And there are funds that are relevant, but it's also funds where we detected that that funds were used for social inclusion, for independent living. So this is in European Structural Investment Funds, and also Employment and Social Innovation Fund, ESI. What is European and structural investment funds are really like big amounts and can really have impact on people's lives if used properly. And it was changed over the years. So in a previous programming period, it was, the idea was to put closer policy and programming. So really to put in line strategy Europe 2020 with programming. So let's see how it will actually be in what will be the results, because we see some issues there. And as for the EU and respect of rights of people with disabilities, there are things in place, like also European Code on Conduct on Partnership, which really brings the importance of including civil society organizations, but first of all, disabled people in the programming, in discussion on EU funds, because people concerned need to be part of programming, of decisions about their future, and if they are not included, I mean, it's very difficult to know what are the needs of people without talking and consulting people. And structural funds regulations clearly protect rights of disabled people. There are common provision regulation, European Social Fund, which promotes social inclusion, and even there is this line, red line, and it clearly states that ESIF should promote transition from institutional to community-based care. There is also European Regional Development Fund, which is supporting strengthening the economic and social cohesion of the European Union, and it's important here because we talk here a lot about constructions, and what we detected in EU funds that some institutions were built with ERDF money. But in ERDF regulation, it is clearly stated that specific needs of persons with disabilities are taken into account. ERDF will seek to prevent isolation or segregation and transition from institutional to community-based services. So it is well established in the EU regulation. There is a protection. There is also European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development that also, well, that works mainly for the for the balance on territorial development of rural economies, but we have some concerns in that fund also because it tackles also social inclusion. There are also EU funds, importance of EU funds and energy efficiency. So we noticed in the past programming periods, but also now, that sometimes under the excuse of energy efficiency, some institutions are just renovated, refurbished. So close monitoring should be ensured also in that part of funds. So these are a bit figures for 2014, 2020, and you know that new regulations are being now discussed and should be adopted at some point. We are quite satisfied with the new proposals in ENIL, and especially ESIF brings some novelties that really restricts development of any kind of institutions. And I mentioned also EASY. I won't go into details about EASY, but it's directly managed by the Commission, and it's also a program that works on promoting of inclusion, of social inclusion, and combating poverty and discrimination. So we mentioned CRPD as an important legal document. We mentioned EU regulations, and obviously there were issues with the use of funds. Even the European Ombudsman made own initiative on the use of structural funds, and they made guidelines to the Commission on how to ensure investments are in line with the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. And one of these guidelines focuses on monitoring and complaint system, because Ombudsman also asked the Commission to ensure that these are adequate and efficient. European Commission made also guidance on ensuring the respect of Charter of Fundamental Rights, and consequences of non-respect are possible interruptions of payment deadlines, possible suspension of payments, possible financial corrections, possible infringement proceedings, etc. I mentioned the Commission proposal, but I won't go into details. Let's see what is the final version when it's adopted. But it looks good. There are good elements, especially some novelties. Really, what I mentioned in the ESF Plus. So we have like good legal background in EU regulations, Charter, Fundamental Rights, CRPD. And having all member states ratified CRPD, having EU ratified CRPD, the only convention ratified by the EU, and we still see issues. For example, what we noticed in a previous programming period, 2007-2013, was that funds were used sometimes to build new institutions. What we see now more and more in practice, that funds are being used to build new institutions, but smaller ones. We call them like small group homes. There are different names, and that is happening in many European countries. So what we notice is like how structural funds are commonly used. You have in one table on this side renovation, modernizing, and we give alternatives, so developing alternatives in the community that facilitate independent living, also building of new institutions, building group homes or living centers, and how it should be used, increasing the social housing stock, purchasing regular apartments, and also making mainstream services accessible and available to disabled people. What we hear often, because we interact non-stop with our members, of course, in countries, with governments, with the European Commission, members of European Parliament, European Ombudsman, and when we see a problem, we notify governments, we notify the Commission, And we have often we get some stereotype arguments. These are why the institution was built again, I mean small one. They say it's a temporary process. But what is, and this is part of DI, this is not part of DI, because there is no plan after this temporary process. What comes after? What we see often that people actually die in those temporary accommodation. Adults, children. We often get the argument that is people have nothing, no one to take care of them. Well, that's why personal assistance is needed. And that's why European structural funds can be used for personal assistance. We do always offer alternatives. And when we discuss, we say, well, it should be transformed. So we give alternatives. We also hear often, well, that's very costly, you know. Do you have cost-benefit analysis? So we try to remind that we start from a human rights protection. You know, we talk about lives, and there are analyses how costly it is, but sometimes without, maybe there is not enough awareness raised, how people should actually live, how services should be developed in the community. Maybe there is lack of this awareness. And then we issued last year a report where we listed a bit our concerns and recommendations, what can be done. I will just, we noticed that there is a slow progress really in some member states establishing strategies that really have an impact and effect on people's lives. And funds continue to support projects that exclude disabled people. The existing monitoring system is not strong enough, and disabled people and organizations, civil society organizations, are largely excluded from the whole process of preparing projects and the implementation of projects. And member states continue placing people in institutional care. This is changing, and we see this practice that is really changing and developing more and more. So we made some recommendations. There are many, like provide training on general comments, ensure compliance with the CRPD, review ex-ante conditionalities, take action to prevent the inappropriate use of EU funds, improve the monitoring mechanisms, involve disabled people in evaluation, and enhance the implementation of the partnership principle, and really encourage more member states to use funds for the DI, because not all member states use funds for a DI. So we also do that. We encourage member states to use, but then the thing is how it will be implemented, you know. Will it be, some member states use it they have good projects, they want to develop personal assistance projects, for example, but then it needs to be monitored, because not even the good examples are not entirely perfect, because sometimes they exclude some group of people. So it should be really closely monitored. We really very much, you know, rely on our members also who are in the countries, but often they don't have, of course, capacities, and there are not many to follow in details. We always mention, you know, this compliance with the CRPD, but we also heard in many occasions within the European Commission that is, well, UN documents, not legally binding, you know. So that is our big concern, actually, how UNCRPD is actually, how it's applied. Is it applied? Or there are that we hear sometimes comments, it's not clear what is an institution. It's quite clear in a CRPD, and also when we see on the grounds. I mean, as long as people are segregated, living together, having rules, they don't have a choice where, with whom, how, and when to live. That is an institution. We often have a question, so what is the minimum number? Well, we don't talk about numbers, we talk about people, about people's lives, and people need to have a choice how to live. And if that is not the case, it is an institution and and the funds are not spent in line with the CRPD. I will give you just a couple of examples before we go to the case study. This is from 2007-2013, a photo. It was a video from Estonia. This was like a village with houses built only for disabled people. There were like 8 to 10 in every house, and they said they were promoting this as a good deinstitutionalization project. They were like really at the edge, in the middle of the fields. This is where they lived, and 10 people per service and 6 service units. So there was a daily plan, what people could do. These are home rules. I follow the daily plan of the home. During the night, I stay in the home. I know that in the territory of the home, it is prohibited to consume alcohol. If agreed with the occupational therapist, I can use my own things in my own room, TV, radio, etc. If agreed with the occupational therapist, I have an opportunity to use the home's telephone 10 minutes per week. I think we all use a bit more. Yeah, and so this was presented as a DI project, like a good example, and that this is definitely an institution. They were living there still according to rules. Portugal, 2014-2020, we just detected. So when you see for the first time this building, it makes you think of what? Some ideas? Yeah. I also said that when I see it, it looks like a bit like a prison, but nice, newly built. Well, they didn't like. Huh? Yeah. And okay, I didn't put. I had more photos of this, but it was inaugurated they celebrated opening of this institution. It's for 16 people. It was during this programming period. The money is used from ERDF, and we are in discussion with the Commission because this is in Azores, so in the middle of tourist area. It's still not unclear if it's only for disabled people, who will stay there, how it's, yeah, and we are in discussions for this, but this is a big problem. They have several beds together in the room, and this is not the only case in Portugal, for example. Now we detected many more, and we are in a dialogue with the Commission. I would like to mention also Hungary. Also, the current programming period, together with our members from Hungary, we requested suspension of fund because there was a call on proposal where basically they are planning to remove 2,500 people from big institutions to smaller. They are planning to use 76 million euros to place people in smaller institutions. Those small institutions will be in abandoned areas or also linked to the old institution. And so that was last year, basically, that we asked for the suspension. It's still ongoing. There are many concerns ongoing there, exchanges. So what we detected, that many of these group homes will be built basically just next by the big institution. People will be driven by buses, and arguments also, they say, yeah, but it's better than the big one, and people don't have alternative, so they don't know for better than the big institution. And these are some useful resources that you can consult. And we'll go now to the case study. And I will just open it. Sanja, where is...
Thank you very much, Nataša.
Okay, I will just show you... Sorry.
Yeah.
I wanted, because this is the new version, I wanted to show you some more photos. Wait, just... Okay, this one in Portugal. Okay. Yeah. So this is like how they celebrated the opening. Where is it? Okay, yeah. These are the beds, and that's it. And I will open also here the case study. Okay. So it's also to help us with your fresh ideas, because we have on daily basis situations in different member states when our members call us what to do, what should we do, you know, this has been built, or etc. So this, like this case, you will be divided in 3 groups. So basically it's a fictional country. Government of a country A prepared an operational program with one of the EU funds, which includes a number of measures to support the inclusion of people with disabilities. Some of the operations will specifically facilitate DI process and access to independent living. The funding under one specific call will be used for building, renovation, furnishing, equipment of 4 daycare centers and 60 care homes for people with disabilities. So you will have 3 groups, and every group will have the same question. So really, but you can make it very short, you know, you don't need to even, but really like first thing that comes to your minds in whichever group you are. So what questions come to your mind in relation to this call? What would you want to know about it? What legal standards are relevant to evaluate if the rights of people with disabilities will be respected through this operation? What would you like to learn more about this call? And would you maybe complain? Whom would you consult? So, yeah.